She had the nerve to look my sweet tia Rosa in the eye and tell her that our Mexican family, her new neighbors, were just too poor, too ethnic for her precious, upscale street. She sneered at our language, our food, our very presence, all while living comfortably in a house she had no idea belonged to me. This racist Karen, with her immaculate nails perfect for pointing out imaginary flaws and that distinctively sharp, asymmetrical blonde haircut that seemed to defy gravity, spent weeks trying to drive my beloved aunt and uncle out. What she didn't know, as she was busy stewing in her misplaced superiority, her oversized sunglasses acting as a shield of judgment, was that her perfectly manicured little kingdom, well, I owned it. And the eviction notice I held clutched in my hand, practically vibrating with righteous energy. That was going to be the most satisfying moment of my entire life. The moment her world came crashing down because she picked on the wrong family. Stick around, because this is the story of how I served a piping hot cup of karma, landlord style. My name is Maria, and my family story is one of resilience, built from the ground up. My parents, they came to this country from Mexico with hopeful hearts and hands ready to work. They carried with them dreams far bigger than the few pesos they had. My father, bless his soul, was a dynamo. He'd take on any job, grueling hours in construction, late nights washing dishes in steamy restaurant kitchens. My mother, her fingers nimble and skilled, was a gifted seamstress who also cleaned homes to make ends meet. Every single dollar they earned was precious, saved not for fleeting luxuries, but for a solid foundation, for a future for their children. Now, as a woman in my late 30s, I carry their legacy and their values deep within me: the dignity of hard work, the importance of humility, and the unwavering belief that every single person deserves respect. It's a principle I live by. Through decades of relentless effort and shrewd, careful decisions, they managed to purchase a small, unassuming house. Then, with more sacrifice, another, and eventually a few more. These weren't grand estates or flashy investments. They were modest, solid homes in decent, hardworking neighborhoods. They became landlords, but they were the antithesis of the greedy slumlords you often hear horror stories about. They were fair, always. They fixed leaky faucets and creaky doors promptly. They understood that a home wasn't just four walls and a roof. It was a sanctuary. When they passed on, they entrusted these properties to me. It was a profound responsibility, a heavy weight at times, but more than that, it was an immense, beautiful gift, a living testament to their enduring love and incredible sacrifice. I wasn't some high-powered real estate tycoon. I was simply a daughter, trying her best to honor her parents' hard-earned legacy, managing these homes with the same diligence and care they always had. I generally preferred to keep a low profile. Most of my tenants dealt with the property manager I'd hired, meaning very few people actually knew me as the owner. It just made things, I thought, simpler, less complicated. My life was, by most standards, pretty normal. I had my own wonderful small family, a career I found fulfilling which also granted me the flexibility to oversee the properties, and I deeply cherished my extended family, especially my tia Rosa and tio Mateo. They were my godparents, and honestly, they felt like a second set of parents to me. Having recently retired, they were looking to downsize, to find a peaceful haven where they could enjoy their well-deserved golden years. As fate would have it, I had a lovely, cozy 3-bedroom house that had just become vacant. It was nestled in a quiet, tree-lined suburban neighborhood, the kind with meticulously manicured lawns and the happy sounds of children riding their bikes on the sidewalks. It seemed absolutely perfect for them. I told my tia and tio that the house was theirs if they wanted it, no rent of course. I just wanted them to enjoy it because they'd done so much for me, for everyone. They were absolutely overjoyed, their faces beaming, and a warmth spread through me, knowing they'd be comfortable, happy, and close by. Move-in day was a whirlwind of joyous chaos and excited energy. My cousins, my siblings, We were all there, a small army of love, hauling boxes filled with memories, carefully arranging furniture, the air thick with laughter and the irresistible aroma of my tia Rosa's famous tamales she'd thoughtfully brought for our makeshift lunch. It was a vibrant, happy, bustling scene. And that's when we first laid eyes on her.
Karen.
She resided just a few doors down. I'd never personally encountered her before. This particular property was one handled entirely by my manager. She emerged from her impeccably kept house, the kind with unnaturally vibrant green grass that looked like a carpet and not a single stray leaf daring to mar the pristine perfection of her driveway. She sported the haircut, you know the one I mean, sharply angled, aggressively blonde, looking like it required a daily consultation with a spirit level. And, of course, the oversized sunglasses were perched imperiously on her nose, despite the sky being somewhat overcast that day. She was clad in expensive-looking activewear, though she gave no indication of heading for a jog or any form of exertion. A large, conspicuously branded tote bag was slung casually over her shoulder, like a badge of honor. She didn't approach us, not initially. She just observed. Her posture was rigid, her gaze intense, like a hawk meticulously scrutinizing its prey. Her lips were pursed into a thin, disapproving line, and her eyes, mostly concealed behind those dark lenses, methodically scanned every single item we carried out of the moving truck. A slightly worn but deeply beloved armchair, my Tio Mateo's favorite reading spot, that earned a judgmental squint from her. A box clearly labeled Cocina, Allah's Weissartens, pots and pans for the kitchen, that elicited a subtle, almost imperceptible sniff of what could only be described as disdain. I happened to catch her eye at one point and offered a polite, neighborly smile and a small wave. She just stared back, unblinking, then turned her head with a deliberate, glacial slowness that felt like a calculated snub. My cousin Jorge, never one to mince words, muttered under his breath that she certainly wasn't a ray of sunshine. We chuckled, trying to brush it off, but a tiny, uncomfortable knot of unease began to settle in the pit of my stomach. This was supposed to be a joyous new chapter for my aunt and uncle. I found myself fervently hoping this woman wasn't going to cast a shadow over it. Oh, how profoundly little I knew then about the storm that was brewing. That initial, faint sense of unease didn't take long to blossom into full-blown irritation, and then into genuine, deep concern. Karen, as we quickly learned her name was from other, significantly friendlier neighbors, seemed to have unilaterally appointed herself the unofficial welcomer/warden of the street. And it was glaringly, painfully obvious that she did not approve of its newest residents, my family. It began with subtle, almost deniable acts of hostility. If Tia Rosa was in her front yard, lovingly tending to her newly planted flowers, Karen would coincidentally stroll by, phone pressed tightly to her ear, speaking just a decibel or two louder than necessary about the critical importance of maintaining neighborhood standards, or how some people just didn't seem to understand the concept of curb appeal. My Tia Rosa, a woman whose touch could coax blooms from a desert and whose garden was already showing signs of becoming a neighborhood gem, would simply offer a polite buenos dias. Karen would pointedly ignore this greeting, her nose held a fraction of an inch higher in the air. The way she held her phone, always ready, made me think she was documenting everything. Then, the anonymous notes started appearing. Not properly addressed, just coldly tucked into their mailbox. Typed, impersonal complaints about alleged excessive noise on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when my Tio Mateo was peacefully reading on the porch. Another note followed, this one about their car being parked improperly in their own driveway, with the ludicrous claim that it was a mere inch too close to the sidewalk. It was beyond petty, it was incessant, and it was unmistakably, cruelly targeted. I made it a point to visit my aunt and uncle almost daily during those first few challenging weeks. I wanted to help them settle in, bring them groceries, or sometimes just sit with them for a comforting cafecito and a much-needed chat. Karen, with her hawk-like vigilance, would often see me coming and going. She never acknowledged my presence with anything more than a frigid, dismissive stare. I remember one occasion distinctly. I was carrying in a large, steaming pot of pozole I'd lovingly prepared for Tia and Tio. Karen was retrieving her mail and watched, with that same assessing, disapproving gaze, as I struggled with the heavy pot all the way to their front door. There was no offer to help, not even a flicker of common courtesy. Just that cold scrutiny. In her eyes, I was probably just the hired help, another brown face that didn't quite belong in her pristine neighborhood. The bitter irony was already starting to steep, though I hadn't yet fully grasped its potent, satisfying potential. My internal temperature was rising with each dismissive glance, each veiled insult directed at my family. The escalation was steady, insidious, like a pot of water being brought slowly, deliberately to a boil. Karen soon progressed from passive aggression to making comments directly to them, though always coated in a thin, slippery veneer of plausible deniability. She'd ask with a saccharine, false smile if they were having another family gathering, if my cousins and I were over for Sunday dinner. Her tone managed to imply that our quiet family meal was somehow a raucous, unwelcome neighborhood disturbance. Tia Rosa, bless her infinitely patient heart, would just smile sweetly and reply yes, it was lovely to have family visit. But Karen's patience, if she possessed any to begin with, was clearly wearing dangerously thin. One sun-drenched afternoon, Tia Rosa was sitting peacefully on her porch swing, humming a soft, gentle Spanish lullaby she used to sing to me as a child. Karen marched purposefully over to the very edge of her own immaculate lawn, hands planted firmly on her hips, her face a contorted mask of pure indignation. She announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, that some people in this neighborhood preferred peace and quiet. She added that they didn't all appreciate that kind of music. My Tia Rosa, a woman whose gentle soul wouldn't hurt a fly, looked utterly bewildered, her eyes wide with confusion. "Oh, I am sorry if I was too loud," she stammered, her English faltering slightly under the sudden, unwarranted pressure of Karen's attack. Karen pressed on, undeterred, taking an aggressive step closer, physically invading Tia Rosa's personal space. It was not just about being loud, she insisted. It was about fitting in. This, she declared, was a respectable neighborhood. They had certain standards. Her eyes, cold and dismissive, swept disdainfully over Tia Rosa's colorful, beautifully embroidered blouse, then lingered with pointed disapproval on the small, cherished Virgin Mary statue Tia had lovingly placed amongst her burgeoning roses. The unspoken, ugly implication hung heavy and suffocating in the air. I arrived just as Karen was stalking back to her own house, a picture of self-righteous fury. Tia Rosa looked visibly shaken, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "What happened, Tia?" I asked, my heart plummeting, a cold dread washing over me. She recounted the deeply unpleasant exchange, her voice trembling with hurt and disbelief. She said, "We don't fit in, Mija." Heat, fierce and protective, flooded my cheeks. How dare she? How dare this woman speak to my sweet, gentle aunt like that? A protective rage I hadn't felt in years began to stir within me. The final straw, the incident that unequivocally transformed Karen from a mere neighborhood nuisance into an outright villain in my eyes, occurred about a week later. Tio Mateo had been diligently working in the small patch of garden at the side of their house, carefully planting some chili peppers and cilantro, things that reminded him of home. Karen was outside, ostensibly weeding her own flawless flower beds, but in reality, her attention was laser-focused on him, watching him like a vulture circling its prey. He hummed a little tune as he worked, a traditional Mexican folk song, cheerful and nostalgic. Suddenly, Karen shot up, trowel still clutched in her hand, and marched directly up to their property line. "Excuse me," she barked, her voice so abrupt it made Tio Mateo jump. "Do you have to make that noise?" And frankly, she continued, waving a dismissive, contemptuous hand towards his neat rows of thriving seedlings, "this whole setup, it is starting to look a bit ethnic. It is really bringing down the look of the entire street. People around here," she added conspiratorially, "are starting to talk." Tio Mateo, a proud man who had worked tirelessly and honorably his entire life, drew himself up to his full height. "Señora," he said, his voice impressively firm, yet still remarkably polite, "I am in my own yard, cultivating my own food. It is truly not your concern." Karen's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "Oh, it is my concern," she spat back, "when people like you move in and start changing things. This used to be a nice, quiet American neighborhood. Now look at it. You people are just too poor for a place like this. You simply don't belong." Her voice had risen to a shrill cry, and the word poor dripped with such concentrated venom, such utter contempt, it made my blood run ice cold when Tia Rosa recounted the horrific exchange to me later, tears streaming uncontrollably down her face. "She said we were too poor, Maria," she sobbed. "After all your papa and mama worked for, after all we worked for. That was it. The absolute limit. The gloves were well and truly off." Hearing my gentle aunt cry those heartbroken tears, seeing the profound pain and deep humiliation etched into my stoic uncle's eyes, something vital inside me snapped. This wasn't just about appalling bad manners anymore. This was targeted, relentless, racist harassment. And Karen, in her ignorant bliss, had absolutely no idea who she was truly messing with. No inkling at all. My mind, usually preoccupied with peaceful resolutions and mundane property upkeep, began to churn with a completely different, much colder kind of energy. An energy that was far less about fixing leaky faucets and far more about fixing Karen. Permanently. That night, sleep was an impossibility. Tia Rose's tear-streaked face, Tio Mateo's quiet, wounded dignity. These images replayed relentlessly in my mind, each one a fresh stab of pain and anger. The phrase "too poor for this neighborhood" echoed in my ears, each syllable laced with Karen's sneering, hateful disdain. Too poor? My family, who had painstakingly built their legacy from absolutely nothing, who valued community, hard work, and kindness above all else? The sheer, unadulterated, ignorant arrogance of it made my hands clench into tight, trembling fists. I felt a rage so profound it almost choked me. I finally got out of bed, the digital clock on my nightstand glowing a stark 2:17 a.m., and padded silently to my small home office. This was the nerve center, the place where I kept all the meticulously organized files for the rental properties. An idea, cold, sharp, and brilliantly clear, had begun to crystallize in my mind. I remembered that Karen lived just a few doors down from Tia and Tio. I also vividly remembered that the house she currently resided in, her castle of supposed superiority, was one of mine. One of the very properties my beloved parents had toiled and sacrificed for years. The irony was so thick, so potent, I could almost taste its bitter sweetness. I pulled open the filing cabinet drawer, the one neatly labeled Willow Creek Properties, the very name of the street they all lived on. My fingers, trembling slightly with a mixture of anger and anticipation, flipped rapidly through the manila folders. Miller, Chun, Thompson, and then, there it was. Henderson, Karen. My breath hitched in my throat. I slowly, deliberately opened the file. Inside, the lease agreement, signed 2 years prior. Her contact information. And then, the crucial part, the notes section meticulously kept by my property manager. My eyes scanned the neatly typed entries, each one a small nail in Karen's coffin. March 15th, rent payment 5 days late. Tenant claimed a bank error. Paid the requisite late fee, but not without a complaint. April 10th, rent payment 3 days late. Excuse this time, due to unexpected car repairs. paid the late fee, again, with audible reluctance. Another entry jumped out at me. July 22nd, official warning issued regarding an unauthorized pet. Tenant adamantly claimed she was merely dog-sitting for a friend, but a vigilant neighbor had reported consistent barking for over a week. The pet was subsequently removed. And then, more recently, an entry dated September 5th, neighbor complaint from Mr. Johnson in Unit 12B, another of my properties on that same street, though not Tia and Tio's, regarding Henderson consistently leaving her trash bins out on the curb for a full 48 hours past the scheduled pickup, attracting rodents. So, Karen wasn't just a nightmare neighbor to my cherished family. She was, in fact, a borderline problematic tenant in general. My property manager was exceptionally good at his job, but he handled things strictly by the book, always professional, often inclined to give people the benefit of the doubt. But this was entirely different. The lease agreement, I knew from years of managing these properties, contained standard, boilerplate clauses. Clauses about maintaining the property in good condition, yes, but also, crucially, clauses pertaining to the quiet enjoyment for all residents and strictly prohibiting any form of harassment or behavior that disturbs the peace of the neighborhood or other tenants. Her vile, racist tirades against my aunt and uncle, her constant, wearing antagonism. This wasn't just rudeness. This was a flagrant, undeniable violation of the community's spirit the lease implicitly, and in several sections explicitly, aimed to protect. She was actively, maliciously creating a hostile environment for my family in a home that I owned, while simultaneously living in another home that I also owned. A slow, predatory smile began to spread across my face. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had just stumbled upon the perfect, most exquisitely fitting solution to a very ugly, very personal problem. She had the audacity to think my family was too poor, too ethnic for her precious neighborhood. She had absolutely no idea that this neighborhood, or at least a significant, valuable chunk of it, including the very roof over her entitled head, belonged to the very family she was so viciously terrorizing. The deliciousness of this realization was almost overwhelming. The very next morning, my first call was to my lawyer. I explained the entire situation, calmly and methodically, detailing every instance of Karen's escalating harassment of my aunt and uncle, and carefully cross-referencing it with her existing, documented lease violations, the clear pattern of late rent payments, the previous official warnings. My lawyer listened patiently, asking clarifying questions now and then. When I finally finished, there was a thoughtful pause on the other end of the line. Then he said, his voice firm and reassuring, "Maria, you have grounds. Solid grounds. Harassment of other tenants, especially with such clear racial undertones, combined with her existing track record, yes, we can absolutely proceed with an eviction." Those words were pure music to my ears. We drafted the official notice that very day. 30 days to vacate. The reasons were clearly, unequivocally, and legally stated. Consistent failure to pay rent in a timely manner, violation of community rules regarding pet ownership, and, most significantly, harassment of fellow residents, thereby creating a hostile and disruptive environment, in direct breach of clauses 14b and 17c of the signed tenancy agreement. There was no emotional language, no personal accusations, just cold, hard, undeniable facts. I could have easily had my property manager deliver the notice. Or I could have hired a detached, impersonal process server. That would have been the standard, professionally distant way to handle it. But oh no. This was deeply personal. This was for Tia Rosa's heartbroken tears and for Tio Mateo's forced, pained stoicism. This was for my parents, who had taught me through their own lives to always stand up against bullies, especially the insidious kind of bullies who cloak their bigotry in pearls and privilege. I was going to deliver this notice myself. I needed to see her face. I decided that Saturday morning would be perfect. People are usually home then. There's a good chance of an incidental audience. I wanted Karen to feel the full, crushing weight of her actions, not in the privacy of her home, but out in the open, where her carefully constructed facade of neighborhood superiority could shatter spectacularly for all to witness. I drove to Willow Creek, the official eviction notice resting in its crisp envelope on the passenger seat next to me. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a volatile mixture of raw nerves and a fierce, righteous anger that had been simmering for weeks. I felt like a warrior heading into a long-awaited battle, armed not with a sword or shield, but with a legally binding lease agreement and the undeniable, powerful truth. I parked my car a little way down the street, out of Karen's immediate line of sight, and walked first towards Tia and Tio's house. I wanted to check on them, to reassure them, and also to make sure they were safely inside when the inevitable fireworks potentially started. Tia Rosa opened the door, her customary warm smile a little strained around the edges. "Mija," she exclaimed, "what a lovely surprise." "I just came to say hello, Tia," I said, giving her a comforting hug.
"How are things today?"
Her eyes, almost involuntarily, flickered towards Karen's house. "Quiet today," she replied softly. "So far." "Good," I said, trying to sound as casual and unconcerned as possible. "Well, I actually have a little errand to run on this street. I'll see you in a bit." As I walked with deliberate, steady steps towards Karen's house, I saw her. She was in her front yard, predictably, not engaged in gardening or any other constructive activity, but pacing agitatedly back and forth on her immaculate, unnaturally green lawn, phone pressed tightly to her ear, gesticulating wildly with one hand. Her voice, sharp and carrying easily in the quiet morning air, drifted towards me. "Absolutely ridiculous," she was saying. "I'm telling you, Eleanor, these people, they have absolutely no respect. The noise, the smells, it's like the whole neighborhood is going downhill fast. Someone really needs to do something about them. Perfect timing. Utterly perfect." I took a deep, fortifying breath and smoothed down the simple cotton dress I was wearing. I wasn't dressed to impress or intimidate, just to be myself. The daughter of hardworking immigrants. The owner of this property. I walked calmly, purposefully, up her pristine driveway. She turned as I approached, her eyes, those cold, perpetually judgmental eyes, narrowing instantly when she saw me. She clearly didn't recognize me as anything other than that woman who frequently visits those problematic Mexicans. She ended her call with a curt, "I'll call you back," and then faced me, arms crossed defiantly over her chest, oversized sunglasses still firmly in place, her lips already forming a preemptive, condescending sneer. "Yes," she bit out. "Can I help you?" The heavy emphasis she placed on the word, help, strongly suggested she highly doubted my capacity to need or deserve any. "Hello, Karen," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, betraying none of the turmoil churning inside me. Her eyebrows, perfectly sculpted and no doubt costing a small fortune to maintain, shot up in surprise or annoyance. "Do I know you?" she asked, her tone dripping with unconcealed condescension. "Actually," I said, allowing myself the smallest, tightest of smiles. "We haven't been properly introduced. You see, you know my aunt and uncle, Rosa and Mateo Rodriguez, who live just down the street." A flicker of something, irritation? Perhaps a dawning realization that I was directly connected to her primary targets? Crossed her face.
"Oh,
"Them," she said, drawing out the word as if it left a foul taste in her mouth. "And what do you want? Are you here to apologize for their behavior?" I had to physically bite the inside of my cheek to keep from bursting out laughing. Apologize? Oh, this was going to be even more exquisitely satisfying than I had dared to imagine. "No, Karen, I am not here to apologize. I'm Maria Rodriguez." I paused then, letting my name hang significantly in the air for a long moment before delivering the payload. "I own this house. The one you are currently renting." The change in her expression was nothing short of cinematic. Her jaw, which had been set in a rigid, unyielding line of absolute superiority, literally dropped. The oversized sunglasses, her usual armor, suddenly seemed less like a power accessory and more like a flimsy, inadequate shield. Her perfectly manicured hand, the one that was probably so adept at pointing out others' perceived flaws, fluttered uncertainly towards her throat. You what?" she stammered, her voice losing all its earlier shrill sharpness, now suddenly small, reedy, and laced with disbelief. "I am your landlord, Karen," I stated, keeping my tone remarkably even, almost gentle, which seemed to unnerve her even more than overt anger might have. "And this," I said, holding up the crisp white envelope so she couldn't miss it, "is for you." She stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike. Her eyes darted frantically from the offending envelope to my face, then skittered towards my aunt and uncle's house, where Tia Rosa and Tio Mateo were now standing quietly on their porch, watching the unfolding drama with a quiet, dignified composure. The full, horrifying scope of her colossal misjudgment, the sheer magnitude of her error, began to dawn on her face. It was a slow, painful, visible crumbling of her entire entitled persona. I don't understand," she whispered, but her eyes, wide and rapidly filling with panic, told me she was starting to understand all too well. "It is an eviction notice, Karen," I stated calmly, letting the words sink in. "It seems your tenancy here has unfortunately come to an end. There are several reasons clearly listed, including a consistent pattern of late rent payments, a previous violation of community rules regarding an unauthorized pet, and most recently, and most seriously, your continued harassment of other residents in this community, specifically my family." Her face went from a shocked pale to a blotchy, furious red. "Harassment? That is a complete lie. I was merely concerned about property values. About the neighborhood." "Concerned," I echoed, letting a dangerous sliver of ice finally enter my voice. "Is that what you call telling an elderly couple that they are too poor to live here? That they don't belong because of their ethnicity? Is that what you call making vile, racist remarks and actively trying to intimidate them out of their own home? A home, by the way, that they live in because I, their niece and the actual owner of the property, invited them to?" Karen sputtered, rendered almost speechless. I never said. It was all a terrible misunderstanding. They're just far too sensitive." She looked wildly around, her eyes darting desperately, as if searching for an ally, for someone to validate her claims, but the street was quiet, save for a curious neighbor peeking discreetly through their curtains a few houses down. Her only real audience was me and my family, who had silently endured her relentless bigotry for weeks. "There is no misunderstanding, Karen," I said, my voice now firm and unyielding. "My aunt and uncle have meticulously documented several egregious instances. I have personally witnessed your appalling behavior myself. You have made their lives, and by extension, the lives of all those who care deeply about them, incredibly, unnecessarily unpleasant. And it turns out you've been a less than stellar tenant in other significant ways too." I gestured pointedly with the envelope. "It is all in here, clearly spelled out. You have 30 days to vacate these premises." The fight, the bluster, seemed to visibly drain out of her. Her shoulders, once held so rigidly upright with arrogance, slumped in defeat. The designer tote bag, her symbol of status, suddenly looked heavy and burdensome. The sharp, aggressive haircut seemed to droop, mirroring her deflated ego. But where will I go?" she wailed, the entitlement now morphing into a desperate, pathetic plea. "I cannot just move in 30 days. Can't we please talk about this? I can apologize to your aunt and uncle. I really didn't mean it like that." I looked her straight in the eye, my gaze unwavering. The oversized sunglasses couldn't hide the raw panic that was now swimming nakedly there. "Karen," I said, my voice devoid of any shred of sympathy I might have once been capable of feeling for her plight. "You had countless opportunities to talk, to be a decent human being, to be a respectful neighbor. You chose, repeatedly and deliberately, to be cruel, to be prejudiced, and to be insufferably entitled. The time for talking is well and truly over. This is the consequence." I placed the eviction notice directly into her trembling hand. She just stared at it, dumbfounded. Then she looked up at me, her face a grotesque mask of confusion, impotent anger, and dawning, uncomprehending horror. You planned this," she accused, her voice cracking under the strain. "No, Karen," I replied softly, letting the truth of it settle upon her.
"You did."
Every nasty comment, every judgmental stare, every single piece of hate you so casually threw at my family, you built this exact moment all by yourself. I am just here delivering the bill." I turned then and walked away, leaving her standing there on her perfect lawn, the eviction notice clutched in her hand like a damning judgment, her perfect, ordered world visibly crumbling around her. As I reached the sidewalk, I allowed myself a quick glance back. She was still standing there, looking remarkably small and utterly defeated. I walked over to my tia and Tio. Tia Rosa had tears in her eyes again, but this time, they weren't tears of sadness or humiliation. They were tears of relief, of vindication. Tio Mateo put his strong arm around her, and then he looked directly at me, a slow, profoundly grateful smile spreading across his weathered face. He just nodded, once, a simple, eloquent gesture. And that single nod was all the thanks I needed in the world. The aftermath was surprisingly quiet, for the most part. Karen, to her credit or perhaps due to her complete shock, didn't contest the eviction. I genuinely think the sheer, unadulterated humiliation of being confronted by me, her landlord, the niece of the very people she'd so viciously terrorized, was enough to completely deflate any fight she might have had left in her. Over the next few weeks, we saw moving trucks parked outside her house. There were no dramatic scenes, no further confrontations, no last-ditch attempts at negotiation. Just the quiet, methodical dismantling of her life in that neighborhood. I heard through the grapevine from one of the other, friendlier neighbors that Karen had been telling people she was moving to an even more exclusive and upscale area, a clear, rather pathetic attempt to save face. We all knew the real truth. The day her 30 days were officially up, I drove by the house. It was empty, the windows bare, the curtains gone. That unnaturally perfect lawn was already looking a little less kempt, a little more natural. A simple "for rent" sign, placed there earlier by my property manager, now stood proudly in the yard. There was a palpable sense of peace on the street that simply hadn't been there before. It was as if a dark, oppressive cloud had finally lifted, allowing the sun to shine through. My tia Rosa and Tio Mateo absolutely blossomed. Without Karen's constant, suffocating presence casting a pall over their lives, they relaxed fully into their new home. Tia Rosa's garden flourished, becoming a vibrant, joyous splash of color and life that delighted everyone who passed by. Tio Mateo spent countless contented hours on the porch, reading his books and chatting happily with the other, friendlier neighbors who now stopped by more often, no longer intimidated or put off by Karen's perpetual glares and disapproving scowls. Laughter, warm and genuine, and the comforting, delicious smell of home-cooked Mexican food once again filled their house without any fear of reproach or judgment. For me, there was a profound, deeply satisfying sense of justice. It wasn't just about revenge, though I won't lie, there was a certain undeniable sweetness to that aspect of it. More importantly, it was about protecting my family, fiercely and effectively. It was about standing up to blatant bigotry in a direct, tangible, impactful way. My parents had worked their fingers to the bone, sacrificing so much to build something lasting, to create security and opportunity for their children and their children's children. And that legacy, those modest properties they had poured their hearts into, had inadvertently, wonderfully, given me the power to shield their loved ones from the kind of ugly, soul-crushing prejudice they themselves had likely faced far too many times in their own journey. It taught me a valuable lesson. Sometimes, the quiet power you hold, the power you might not even fully realize you possess, can be the most effective and righteous tool for achieving justice. Karen, in her arrogance, thought she was looking down on people she deemed lesser, people she considered beneath her. She never once imagined, not in her wildest dreams, that one of those very people held the keys to her meticulously curated castle. It's a potent reminder, I think, to always be exceedingly careful how you treat others. You never truly know who they are, or what quiet strengths they hold, or what connections they might have. And sometimes, just sometimes, karma doesn't just send a polite memo, it hand-delivers a legally binding eviction notice. And that, my friends, is a very, very satisfying story to tell.